The metallic and relentless sound of the alarm clock shattered the silence at 6:01 a.m. Eduardo did not move. For exactly 5 minutes, he allowed himself to sink even further into the coldness of the Egyptian cotton sheets, a luxury that, like all others in his life, was just a hollow detail, devoid of any real comfort. The ringing stopped, and the silence that followed felt even heavier. He got up, his body like a suit of lead armor, and walked mechanically to the bathroom. The hot water from the shower was a momentary shock, a promise of warmth that dissolved into steam before it could penetrate the layer of ice surrounding his spirit. When he emerged, the usual emptiness awaited him, as faithful as a shadow. His apartment, on the top floor of one of the city's most coveted buildings, was less a home and more a mausoleum. Each piece of furniture, imposing and minimalist, had been chosen with surgical precision. The walls, in shades of grey and graphite, absorbed the light, and the cold marble floor seemed to echo the absence of hurried footsteps or spontaneous laughter. Through the immense glass windows, the metropolis awakened, a sea of lights and movement that for many would symbolize power and achievement. For Eduardo it was just wallpaper, a backdrop to his own insurmountable loneliness. In the kitchen, he prepared the coffee, strong, bitter, without sugar. He drank it standing, staring into nothingness, the taste in his mouth perfectly reflecting the flavor of his existence. Everything in his routine was a ritual of restraint, an effort to keep the chaos of his inner world locked away. Before closing himself in his office, he paused in front of a half-open door in the hallway. There, in a room painted in soft shades of pink and white, Sophia slept. At 5 years old, she was a miniature angel, her blonde hair spread across the pillow, and her tranquil breathing filling the small space with a life that seemed to be lacking throughout the rest of the house. He watched her through the crack, not daring to enter. Like a spectator before a work of art he did not feel worthy to touch. A sharp pang of guilt hit him, so familiar that he barely registered the pain. Sophia was his only anchor, the sole link to the life he had lost, a happiness he had himself demolished. In her, he saw the traits of a future that would never exist, the living memory of a love he believed he had betrayed and destroyed. That empire he ruled during the day had been built on the ashes of that loss, a self-imposed penance that never seemed sufficient. A dark secret, a cruel manipulation he swallowed like poison, had transformed him into this man, a statue of success on the outside, hollow on the inside. He stepped away from the door, the mask of impassibility back in place. Work was his refuge and his prison. Immersed in spreadsheets, quotes, and market strategies, he found a functional distraction. The numbers did not lie, did not feel, did not abandon him. They were predictable and secure. He built a conglomerate from nothing, a financial fortress that protected him from the world, but isolated him from any human warmth. Victory, however, was tasteless. Each contract signed, each target hit, merely added another brick to his wall, making it taller, more impenetrable. Sitting in his leather chair with the city at his feet, Eduardo felt the weight of silence. He had everything money could buy, but he would sell every penny to feel, if only for a second, the peace he saw on his daughter's sleeping face. But he couldn't. Because peace, he bitterly remembered, had been the price of his success. The question that haunted him every night returned, whispering in the corners of his mind, what had he truly lost to get here? And more importantly, would he be able to look at himself in the mirror if one day he uncovered the whole truth behind the ruin he called life? The morning dragged on with the same predictability as always. Video conference meetings, reports analyzed with glacial precision, decisions made with the cold logic of a computer. For Eduardo, the outside world was a series of variables to be controlled. It was the voice of his housekeeper, Donna Elvira, through the intercom that broke his concentration. "Mr. Eduardo, the new nanny has arrived." He pressed the button. "Send her into the office." His voice came out as a command, devoid of any inflection. He rearranged some papers on the desk, a subtle barrier between him and the world. The agency had assured him she was the best, with impeccable references, but to him she was just another piece to fit into the complex machinery of his life, an employee whose only purpose was to ensure that Sophia's existence passed with minimal disturbance to him. The door opened and she entered. The first thing Eduardo noticed was the color. In an environment dominated by black, white, and gray, the mustard wool cardigan she wore was a visual affront. Isabella was of medium height, with long brown hair that fell in soft waves over her shoulders, but it was her eyes that caught his attention for a moment. There was a sparkle in them, a kind of light that seemed completely out of place in that sterile environment. A light, constant smile lingered on her lips. "Good morning, Mr. Eduardo." she said, her voice clear and without the hesitation he was used to hearing from new employees. Miss Isabella, he replied, consulting the form in front of him. He did not stand up. He pointed to the chair across the table. Have a seat. She sat down, her hands resting calmly in her lap. He pushed a contract and a pen across the polished table. Read carefully. The rules are clear and non-negotiable. Absolute discretion. Schedules must be adhered to with British rigor, and Sophia's routine must not be altered without my express permission. As she read, he watched her over the papers. She did not seem intimidated. On the contrary, there was a serenity about her that disturbed him. She did not belong in that place. Her aura of warmth was like a bonfire amidst an iceberg. She signed the document with fluid handwriting and handed it back. The rules are perfectly understandable, sir, she said, still wearing that patient smile. Great. Eduardo stood up, the gesture indicating that the negotiation was over. I will introduce you to Sophia. He guided her down the silent hallway. Her expensive shoes barely made a sound on the marble, but her steps, in simple low shoes, seemed to have a lightness, an almost musical sound that the silence of the house could not muffle. Sophia was in the playroom, a spacious and impeccably organized area where even the disorder seemed calculated. The girl was sitting on the floor, her back to the door, aligning wooden blocks with a concentration that bordered on sadness. She rarely spoke to strangers, usually shrinking away or simply ignoring the presence of anyone other than him or Donna Elvira. Sophia, Eduardo said, his voice softer than usual, yet still laden with formality. This is Isabella. She will take care of you from now on. The girl did not turn around. She continued her meticulous work with the blocks. Eduardo sighed internally. It would be the same as always. But then Isabella did something unexpected. Instead of speaking from above, she knelt on the floor, placing herself at the same level as the child. She said nothing for a long moment, simply observing the blocks. That's a very beautiful castle, she said, her voice a warm whisper. I think it needs a tower right here. Slowly, like a flower blooming in slow motion, Sophia turned her head. Her large blue eyes, usually dull and distant, focused on Isabella, not with fear or distrust, but with genuine curiosity. Eduardo remained frozen at the door, an invisible witness to what happened next. Isabella smiled at the girl, a smile that seemed to envelop her whole face in light. And then the unthinkable happened. Sophia abandoned her blocks, stood up on her wobbly little legs, and walked towards Isabella, and without any hesitation she hugged her. A tight hug, her little arms wrapping around the nanny's neck, her head sinking into her shoulder as if she had found a long-sought safe harbor. Eduardo felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. The air got trapped in his lungs. That scene made no sense. Sophia, his silent and reclusive daughter, surrendering like that to a complete stranger. He, her own father, rarely received such spontaneous displays of affection. Isabella, caught off guard but reacting with a maternal instinct, wrapped the girl in her arms, stroking her hair. She looked at Eduardo over Sophia's head, and in her eyes there was no triumph, only a compassion that hit him even more violently. He took a step back, turned, and returned to the safety of his office, closing the door behind him. The image was etched in his mind. The yellow cardigan, the brown hair, and his daughter, his little and fragile Sophia, nestled in that woman's arms, as if she had finally come home. The logic of his world had been shattered, and a dangerous question began to form, echoing in the silence of his ice fortress. Why? Why her? What did that woman have that he, with all his power and wealth, could never offer? The days that followed Isabella's arrival altered the architecture of silence in Eduardo's house. The emptiness, once a solid and oppressive monolith, was now punctuated by sounds he hadn't heard in years. They were laughter, not loud guffaws, but the crystal-clear and genuine laughter of Sophia, a sound he thought had been buried with the past. They were whispers of stories, the rustling of pages from children's books, and the soft sound of small feet running down the hallway, not in flight but in play. From his office, the fortress from which he commanded his empire, Eduardo became a reluctant observer. He found himself stopping in the middle of analyzing a complex graph, his attention diverted by a fragment of animated conversation coming from the playroom. He caught a glimpse of Isabella and Sophia on the floor, building fantastical worlds with building blocks, the nanny treating the girl's creations with the seriousness of an architect. He saw his daughter, once a passive figure, now gesturing, pointing, her eyes shining with a light he recognized as enthusiasm. A part of him, the logical and paternal part, felt a cold relief. The employee was efficient. Sophia was well cared for, even happy. The arrangement was a success, but another part of him, a part he kept chained in the dungeons of his soul, felt strange. It was an unease, a sensation of being a stranger in his own home. The warmth emanating from those two created an island of life amid his ocean of apathy, and he was on the shore, watching, unsure whether he wanted to drown or learn to swim. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday. The day had been particularly brutal, a series of exhausting negotiations that left him feeling more drained and empty than usual. He was walking toward the kitchen, craving the familiar bitterness of strong coffee when he heard it. It was neither laughter nor conversation, it was a melody. It came from Sophia's room, a soft, pure voice singing an old lullaby. It was a simple melody, sweet and incredibly tender. Eduardo stopped in the dark hallway, his body tense. The sound was so incongruent with the atmosphere of the house that it seemed for a moment like a hallucination. He approached, moving with the caution of a predator, and stopped at the threshold of the door, hidden by shadow. The scene before him was one of painful domesticity. The lamplight cast a golden glow over the room. Isabella was sitting on the edge of the bed, gently rocking Sophia. Her daughter, already in pajamas, had her eyes half closed, her face serene, completely surrendered to the song and the gentle touch of the babysitter. It was then that the melody hit him, not as a sound, but as a physical force. It seeped through the cracks in his armor, ignoring the barriers of cynicism and pain, and touched something deep and dormant. A strange warmth began to spread through his chest, a sensation that was neither pleasurable nor painful, but so intense that it made him hold his breath. It was a warmth he hadn't felt in so long that he could barely recognize it. It was a ghostly echo of a time before the ice, a time of sunny afternoons, easy smiles, and a hand that held his with the same tenderness he saw now. His heart, a muscle atrophied from disuse, gave a strong and painful thump. The image of another face, of different eyes, flickered in his mind for a fraction of a second, so vivid that he stepped back as if he had touched a live flame. The warmth transformed into alarm. That was dangerous. That feeling, that vulnerability. It was the gateway to the kind of pain he vowed never to feel again. That warmth was a weakness, a crack in the wall he had built at such cost. And that woman, with her soft voice and easy smile, was the threat. She was not an employee, she was an intruder, bringing with her forbidden feelings that could destroy the sterile peace he called life. With a sudden movement he turned, his face a mask of contained fury, and marched back to his office, closing the door with a controlled force that made the objects on his desk shake. He would not allow it. He would not let anyone, least of all a naive babysitter, demolish his defenses. His heart was closed for business, permanently. But as he sat in the darkness, the melody still echoed in his mind, a persistent ghost. The seed of doubt had been planted in the frozen soil of his soul. He saw it as a threat, but the question lingered, cruel and treacherous. What if that invasion was not the beginning of a new war, but the end of an old one? Was that woman his end, or the only possible beginning? For the first time in years, Eduardo did not have the answer, and that terrified him more than anything else.